Sometimes the people everyone overlooks are the very ones capable of changing everything. On a chilly Monday morning in downtown Chicago, Emily Carter stepped off a crowded city bus and pulled her worn gray coat a little tighter around her shoulders. The wind cut through the streets between the glass towers, carrying the sounds of honking traffic and hurried footsteps. She glanced at her phone and felt her stomach tighten. It was 8:17 a.m. Her interview started in 13 minutes. Normally, that would have been enough time, but nothing about Emily's life had been normal lately. For 6 long months, she had searched for work. 6 months of unanswered applications, polite rejection emails, and interviews that led nowhere. 6 months of stretching every dollar, skipping little luxuries, and trying to smile for her 8-year-old son, Noah, even when she felt completely exhausted. This interview at Brooks Global Solutions felt different. It wasn't just another opportunity. It felt like her last chance. She hurried toward the towering building ahead of her, clutching a folder containing copies of her resume. Around her, men and women in expensive suits moved confidently through the revolving doors. Emily suddenly became aware of every wrinkle in her coat and every scuff on her shoes. She looked nothing like the polished professionals surrounding her. As she entered the elegant lobby, she noticed several people glance her way before quickly looking elsewhere. The receptionist barely smiled when checking her in. Emily thanked her anyway and took a seat in the waiting area. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her notes. Across the vast lobby, near a bank of elevators, a tall man paused for a moment. Dressed in a dark tailored suit, he appeared to be heading somewhere important. Yet for reasons even he couldn't explain, his attention lingered on the nervous woman sitting alone with the worn folder in her lap. Emily never noticed him. Her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Noah's school field trip next month and how she had promised he would be able to go. She was thinking about the rent payment due in 10 days. She was thinking about the growing stack of bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Most of all, she was thinking about not letting her son see her lose hope. A voice finally called her name. Emily stood, took a deep breath, and followed the recruiter down a hallway lined with glass offices. As she disappeared from view, the man near the elevators continued watching for a second longer before stepping inside and heading to the top floor. Neither of them knew it yet, but this ordinary morning was about to become the beginning of a story neither would ever forget. And while everyone in that building saw Emily Carter as just another struggling applicant hoping for a job, someone was about to discover that she was far more remarkable than she appeared. Emily followed the recruiter into a modern conference room overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, but instead of making her feel inspired, the room only seemed to magnify her anxiety. 3 interviewers sat on one side of a long table. Their expressions were professional but distant. Emily offered a polite smile and introduced herself before taking the empty chair across from them. For the first few minutes, everything seemed manageable. Questions about her previous roles allowed her to speak confidently about project coordination, client communication, and operational planning. Years of experience gradually returned to her voice. Then the conversation shifted. One interviewer asked about a gap in her employment history. Emily explained that she had taken time away to care for family responsibilities before returning to the workforce. Although her answer was honest, she noticed a subtle change in the room. Another interviewer immediately moved to the next question without acknowledging her explanation. As the interview continued, the questions became more technical and increasingly specific. Emily knew many of the answers, but the pressure began to affect her concentration. Twice she stumbled over details she normally would have remembered instantly. The interviewers exchanged brief glances. Each glance felt like another mark against her. She tried to regain her footing, but confidence was slipping away one answer at a time. Meanwhile, several floors above, Ethan Brooks sat in a meeting discussing quarterly expansion plans. The discussion paused when a notification appeared on a monitor beside him. Normally, he ignored recruitment updates, but something made him glance toward the screen. A live internal dashboard displayed candidate evaluations from ongoing interviews. One name caught his attention: Emily Carter. He stared at it for a moment before looking away, uncertain why it seemed familiar. Back in the conference room, the final portion of the interview felt even worse. One interviewer asked Emily how she would handle a hypothetical business crisis involving multiple departments. She started outlining a solution, but nervousness caused her to lose her train of thought halfway through. Silence filled the room. She apologized and attempted to continue, yet the momentum was gone. By the time the interview ended, she already knew the outcome. The recruiter thanked her for coming and escorted her toward the elevator. No one said anything rude. No one raised their voice. Yet the polite smile somehow felt more discouraging than direct criticism. Emily stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close. As the car descended, disappointment settled heavily across her shoulders. She thought about Noah waiting for her after school. She thought about the hopeful look he had given her that morning when he wished her good luck. More than anything, she hated the thought of telling him that nothing had changed. When she reached the lobby, she crossed toward the exit, unaware that a final evaluation was already being entered into the company system. A few moments later, the status beside her name changed to unsuccessful. Employees moved through the lobby without noticing her. To them, she was simply another applicant leaving after an interview. But somewhere in the building, a man was staring at her name on a screen, struggling to remember why it seemed impossible to ignore. Emily pushed through the revolving doors and stepped back onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. The cold air felt sharper now than it had that morning. She adjusted the strap of her bag and began walking toward the nearest bus stop, trying to ignore the weight of disappointment pressing against her chest. She had prepared for this interview for days. She had practiced answers after Noah went to bed. She had researched the company during every spare moment she could find. Yet somehow it still had not been enough. Around her, professionals hurried through the financial district, focused on meetings, deadlines, and opportunities. Emily felt invisible among them. She reached into her coat pocket and checked her phone. There were no new messages. For a moment, she considered calling her sister, but she knew exactly what she would hear. Another reminder not to lose hope. Another encouragement to keep trying. Emily appreciated the support, but encouragement did not pay rent. It did not cover groceries. It did not make rejection hurt less. Several blocks away, inside Brooks Global Solutions, Ethan Brooks remained seated at the conference table while executives discussed expansion strategies. Normally, he was known for his focus. Today, however, his attention kept drifting back to a single name: Emily Carter. The more he looked at it, the more familiar it felt. Finally, while another executive reviewed financial projections, Ethan quietly opened her application file. He expected to find an ordinary candidate profile. Instead, he found something surprising. Her experience was stronger than he remembered seeing in the initial summary. Several years earlier, she had coordinated operations for a regional company during a major restructuring project. Performance evaluations described her as exceptionally resourceful under pressure. Multiple supervisors praised her leadership and problem-solving abilities. Ethan frowned. That did not match the evaluation he had just seen. Curious, he opened the interview notes. The comments focused almost entirely on her nervous delivery rather than her actual qualifications. One note described her as lacking confidence. Another questioned whether she could handle high-pressure situations. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Something felt wrong. He had spent years building a company around identifying talent others overlooked. Yet somehow one of the strongest resumes he had seen that month had just been rejected. Meanwhile, Emily boarded a city bus and settled into a seat near the window. Buildings slid past as she stared outside, barely noticing them. Her thoughts kept returning to Noah. She hated disappointing him. Earlier that morning, he had handed her a small folded note before school. She opened her purse and pulled it out. In uneven handwriting, the note read, "Good luck, Mom. You always figure things out." Emily smiled sadly as tears threatened to form. She quickly blinked them away. She could not afford to fall apart. Not now. Back at company headquarters, Ethan continued reviewing her file. Then he reached a section that immediately caught his attention. Attached to an old project report was a photograph from nearly 8 years earlier. The moment he saw it, a memory surfaced with startling clarity. Ethan stood up so quickly that several executives looked in his direction. He barely noticed them. Across town, Emily's bus approached the next stop. She had no idea that at that very moment, one of the most powerful men in the city had suddenly remembered exactly who she was. 8 years earlier, Brooks Global Solutions had been nothing more than a fast-growing company struggling to survive its own success. Ethan remembered those days clearly. The company was expanding faster than its systems could handle. Deadlines were slipping. Clients were frustrated. Entire departments were working around the clock, trying to prevent major contracts from collapsing. At the time, Ethan had been spending nearly every waking hour putting out fires. Then one afternoon, during a joint operations meeting with an outside partner company, he had met a young project coordinator named Emily Carter. She was not a manager. She was not an executive. In fact, she had been one of the youngest people in the room. Most attendees barely paid attention to her. Ethan remembered that part vividly because he had nearly done the same thing. The meeting had become tense as senior leaders debated solutions that were complicated, expensive, and unlikely to work. For over an hour, nobody could agree on a path forward. Then Emily had quietly raised her hand and asked a simple question. When the room finally allowed her to speak, she pointed out a flaw everyone else had overlooked. Instead of proposing a costly restructuring plan, she suggested a streamlined coordination system that could be implemented within weeks. At first, several executives dismissed the idea, but Emily calmly explained every detail. By the end of the meeting, even the skeptics were listening. Ethan remembered being impressed not only by her intelligence, but by her confidence under pressure. Her proposal eventually saved months of delays and helped stabilize a project that had been heading toward failure. Afterward, he had intended to reach out and thank her personally. Unfortunately, business moved quickly. New projects appeared. New challenges demanded attention. Over time, the memory faded. Until now, standing in his conference room, Ethan stared at the photograph attached to her old project report. The woman leaving his building today was the same woman who had once solved a problem experienced executives could not. How had nobody recognized that? More importantly, how had she ended up sitting through an interview that reduced her entire career to a few nervous moments? Ethan immediately called human resources. Within minutes, he learned that Emily had already left the building. He checked the time and looked out the window toward the streets below. She could be anywhere by now. Across the city, Emily stepped off the bus and began walking toward a small grocery store. She needed milk, bread, and a few other essentials before heading home. Every purchase required careful calculation. As she moved through the aisles, she compared prices and adjusted her list. Certain items quietly disappeared from her basket because they simply cost too much. It was a routine she had grown used to, but that did not make it easier. Meanwhile, Ethan requested additional records from her previous employers. The reports arrived quickly. Every document told the same story. Strong performance, exceptional reliability, consistent praise. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that a serious mistake had been made. Then he noticed something else. Emily's contact information included an address only a few miles away. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his coat and headed toward the elevator. For the first time in years, a scheduled executive meeting no longer seemed important. There was only one thing on his mind. He needed to find Emily Carter before she disappeared from his life a second time. Emily left the grocery store carrying 2 small bags and started the walk toward her apartment building. The afternoon sky had turned gray, and the wind had picked up again. She moved quickly, eager to get home before Noah returned from his after-school program. Despite everything, she was already planning her next step. Another application, another interview, another attempt. Giving up was simply not an option when someone depended on her. A few miles away, Ethan pulled his car into traffic and headed toward the address listed in her file. He rarely drove himself anywhere during the workday. Most of his schedule was managed down to the minute by assistants and executives. Yet none of that mattered right now. Every new document he had reviewed confirmed the same conclusion. Emily was not an average applicant. She was exactly the kind of person his company needed. The fact that she had been rejected felt less like a mistake and more like a failure of the entire hiring process. As he waited at a red light, he called the head of human resources. The conversation was brief. By the time it ended, several managers were already reviewing the interview evaluation. Their confidence in the decision was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Emily reached her apartment building and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was clean but aging. Paint had faded over the years, and the carpet showed signs of wear. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small, but it was home. Family photographs decorated the walls. School drawings covered part of the refrigerator. Emily set down the groceries and immediately began organizing dinner ingredients. Keeping busy helped keep disappointment away. A short time later, Noah burst through the door carrying a backpack nearly half his size. His face brightened the moment he saw her. "How did it go?" he asked hopefully. Emily forced a smile. She hated disappointing him, but she hated lying even more. "I'm not sure yet," she answered gently. "We will see what happens." Noah nodded and accepted the answer. Children often understood more than adults realized. He changed the subject and began talking excitedly about a science project. Emily listened carefully, grateful for the distraction. Across the city, Ethan arrived at her neighborhood just as evening approached. He parked across the street from the apartment complex and studied the building. It was modest and far removed from the luxury high-rises where many corporate executives lived. Seeing it only reinforced what he already suspected. Emily had been carrying burdens most people inside his company could not even imagine. As he sat there considering his next move, his phone rang. It was the director of human resources. The moment Ethan answered, he received confirmation that changed everything. Multiple reviewers had independently re-examined Emily's interview. Every one of them agreed the original decision had focused too heavily on presentation and ignored her actual qualifications. Ethan looked up at the apartment building again. Then, through one of the windows, he noticed a woman helping a young boy set the dinner table. For the first time all day, he finally found her. And he knew he could not walk away without giving her the opportunity she deserved. That evening, after Noah had finished his homework and gone to his room to work on his science project, Emily sat alone at the small kitchen table reviewing her monthly budget. The numbers refused to cooperate. She moved figures from one column to another, hoping a solution might appear if she stared long enough. Rent was due soon. Utilities could not be delayed forever. Groceries had already been reduced to the essentials. She sighed and closed the notebook. There was simply no room left to cut. At that same moment, Ethan remained in his car across the street, wrestling with a decision he rarely faced. In business, he was known for acting quickly. Yet this situation felt different. Showing up, unannounced at a stranger's apartment, even with good intentions, could easily be misunderstood. He wanted to correct a mistake, not create another one. After several minutes of thought, he finally stepped out of the car and crossed the street. Upstairs, Emily was washing dishes when a knock sounded at the door. Her first thought was that a neighbor needed something. Drying her hands, she walked over and opened it. Standing in the hallway was a tall man in a dark coat. For a second, neither spoke. Then recognition flashed across Emily's face. She had seen him in company newsletters and business articles. Ethan Brooks, the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Global Solutions. Emily stared in confusion. "Mr. Brooks?" she asked. Ethan offered a polite smile. "I apologize for showing up unexpectedly. May I have a few minutes of your time?" Emily was too surprised to answer immediately. Nothing about the day had prepared her for this moment. Finally, she stepped aside and invited him in. Ethan entered the modest apartment and immediately noticed signs of a life built through determination rather than comfort. Family photographs, school awards, carefully repaired furniture. Everything reflected effort and responsibility. Noah emerged from his room and froze when he saw a stranger standing in the living room. Emily introduced them, and Noah politely greeted him before returning to his room. Ethan watched the interaction closely. The warmth between mother and son explained more than any resume ever could. Once they were seated at the kitchen table, Ethan spoke honestly. He explained that he had reviewed her application personally after the interview. He explained that he remembered working with her years earlier. Most importantly, he admitted that he believed the company had made a mistake. Emily listened quietly, unsure whether to feel hopeful or skeptical. After months of disappointment, hope had become dangerous. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied carefully. "But the interview did not go well." Ethan nodded. "The interview did not show who you are. Your record did." For the first time that day, Emily felt someone was actually seeing her rather than judging a single moment of nervousness. Yet she still could not understand why a man responsible for thousands of employees had personally come looking for her. And as the conversation continued, Ethan prepared to reveal a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about their connection. Emily sat quietly as Ethan looked around the kitchen for a moment before returning his attention to her. "There is something I have never forgotten," he said. "At least, I thought I had forgotten it. Seeing your file today brought it back immediately." Emily listened carefully. Ethan explained the meeting from years earlier the one during a difficult restructuring project. He described the crowded conference room, the executives arguing over expensive solutions, and the young coordinator who had calmly offered a better answer when nobody else could. As he spoke, Emily slowly remembered the day. At the time, it had seemed like just another difficult assignment. She had never imagined anyone important would remember it years later. "That was you," Ethan said. "You solved a problem that experienced leaders could not solve. You saved months of delays. And then you disappeared." Emily laughed softly. "I did not disappear. Life happened." The words were simple, but they carried years of sacrifice behind them. Ethan nodded. He could see that now. "After that project, I planned to contact you," he admitted. "Then the company grew. Everything became a blur. By the time I thought about it again, I had lost track of where you were." Emily folded her hands together. "And now?" she asked. Ethan smiled slightly. "Now I find out the same person is sitting in one of my interview rooms, and somehow we almost let her walk away." For the first time all evening, Emily felt a small crack appear in the wall of disappointment she had built around herself. Yet she remained cautious. Experience had taught her that good news often came with conditions. "I appreciate the compliment," she said, "but people change." 8 years is a long time. Ethan leaned forward. "That is exactly why I reviewed everything. Your record did not show someone who declined. It showed someone who adapted, learned, and kept delivering results no matter what challenges appeared." Emily looked away briefly. Nobody had spoken about her career that way in a very long time. Most conversations lately had focused on what she lacked. Employers questioned her employment gap. Recruiters questioned her confidence. Interviewers questioned whether she fit their image of success. Very few people asked what she had overcome. Ethan did, and somehow that mattered. "You know," he continued, "I spent years looking for people who could solve problems under pressure. What I eventually learned was that resilience is often more valuable than perfection." Emily smiled faintly. "Then I probably qualify." They both laughed quietly. From his room, Noah peeked around the corner, curious about the conversation. Ethan noticed him and smiled. Noah smiled back before disappearing again. The brief moment felt surprisingly natural. Then Ethan became serious once more. "There is another reason I came here tonight," he said. "Not just to explain what happened. Not just to apologize." Emily felt her heart beat faster. Ethan reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table between them. Whatever was inside, it was clear this visit had never been about a simple conversation. It was about an opportunity that neither of them had expected to exist when the day began. Emily looked down at the folder resting on the kitchen table and hesitated before opening it. After everything that had happened that day, she was almost afraid to expect anything good. Slowly, she lifted the cover and scanned the first page. Her eyes widened. It was not an interview invitation. It was not a request for another evaluation. It was a formal employment offer. For several seconds, she simply stared at the document, unsure whether she was reading it correctly. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. "The position you interviewed for this morning is no longer what I want to discuss," he said. Emily looked up in confusion. Ethan explained that after reviewing her experience and speaking with several department leaders, he believed her skills were being underestimated. The role she had originally applied for would place her under managers with far less practical experience than she possessed. Instead, he wanted her to consider a different opportunity. Emily returned her attention to the offer letter. The title alone surprised her. It was a senior operations leadership position with responsibility across multiple teams. The salary was significantly higher than anything she had expected. The benefits package included healthcare, retirement contributions, and flexible scheduling options designed to support employees with families. Emily felt overwhelmed. Earlier that afternoon, she had walked out of the company believing she had failed. Now she was looking at an opportunity capable of changing her entire future. "There must be a mistake," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "The mistake was letting you leave the building without recognizing your value." Emily read through the details again. Every practical concern she had worried about for months suddenly seemed less impossible. Rent payments, medical expenses, school activities. The constant pressure that had followed her for so long began to loosen its grip. Yet even then, she remained cautious. "Why would you trust me with something this important?" she asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he chose his words carefully. Because successful companies are built by people who keep solving problems when everyone else gives up. Every report I read described you that way, and everything I have seen today confirmed it. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to doubt him. Across the room, Noah stepped out once again and noticed the expression on his mother's face. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Emily smiled, and this time the smile was genuine. "I think it might be," she replied. Noah grinned without fully understanding why. Seeing that simple exchange, Ethan felt even more certain he had made the right decision. Eventually, Emily closed the folder and took a deep breath. The fear that had defined most of her day was slowly being replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope, not the fragile kind that disappears after another rejection, but the kind that feels solid enough to build a future on. As the evening continued, practical details were discussed, questions were answered, and possibilities began to take shape. Yet neither of them realized that the job offer sitting on the kitchen table was only the beginning. The months ahead would reveal just how much one overlooked woman was capable of changing not only a company, but also the life of the man who finally recognized her worth. The following Monday marked the beginning of a completely different chapter in Emily Carter's life. Walking through the doors of Brooks Global Solutions felt very different from the experience she had endured only days earlier. This time she was not arriving as an overlooked applicant hoping for a chance. She was arriving as a respected leader entrusted with meaningful responsibility. Even so, Emily remained the same person she had always been. She worked hard, listened carefully, and focused on solving problems rather than drawing attention to herself. Within weeks, her impact became impossible to ignore. Teams that had struggled with communication began working together more effectively. Delayed projects regained momentum. Employees appreciated her practical leadership style because she understood challenges from every level of an organization. Unlike many executives, she never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked. As months passed, Emily earned respect throughout the company. Her success was not based on special treatment or favors. It came from competence, determination, and years of experience that others had previously failed to recognize. At home, life improved as well. The constant stress surrounding bills and uncertainty gradually faded. Noah joined his school field trip without Emily worrying about the cost. Their apartment felt lighter somehow, not because the furniture had changed, but because the fear that had once filled every corner was finally disappearing. Through it all, Ethan continued observing her work. What impressed him most was not her intelligence. He had known she was intelligent years ago. What impressed him was her character. Success never changed the way she treated people. She respected everyone, from senior executives to new employees. Whenever challenges appeared, she responded with patience instead of panic. Over time, professional conversations turned into genuine friendship. Friendship gradually became trust. Trust became something deeper. Neither of them rushed it. Both understood that meaningful relationships are built through consistency rather than grand gestures. Noah grew comfortable around Ethan as well. They bonded over science projects, baseball games, and countless conversations about the future. Ethan never tried to replace anyone in Noah's life. He simply showed up when it mattered. That quiet reliability meant more than words ever could. One evening, nearly a year after the interview that had almost changed everything for the wrong reasons, Emily and Ethan stood together on a rooftop terrace overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights stretched for miles beneath them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan smiled and shook his head. "It is strange," he said. "I spent years searching for exceptional people. The funny thing is that one of them walked right into my building, and we almost let her leave." Emily laughed softly. "And I spent months believing nobody could see what I was capable of." Ethan looked at her. "The right people eventually do." Emily gazed across the city and thought about the journey that had brought her there. The rejection, the uncertainty, the sacrifices, the countless moments when giving up would have been easier. Looking back, she realized something important. Her value had never depended on whether others recognized it. It had always been there. Someone simply took the time to see it. And sometimes, that single act of recognition can change everything. Not because it creates greatness, but because it finally gives greatness the opportunity to be seen.